Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 92 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descended life forms are so amazingly primitive that two of them think doing a podcast called Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea is a pretty neat idea. They are Jeff and Bryan. Hi there, this is Jeff. I'm with my friend Bryan, and this is our Towel Day
bonus episode. Hey Jeff, how are you?
I'm doing great, Bryan. How are you?
I'm feeling inconsistent and not very clear.
You okay? Not consistent and not clear. Are we going to clear that up?
Oh, I hope so.
Well, that's good, because this is going to be our bonus episode where we are going to take care and answer some of our questions that I had after reading The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, just like we did after reading The Hitchhiker's Guide.
Correct. Looking forward to it.
It seems that after our last bonus episode, at the end, you threw a question out to me that I wasn't expecting. But I think I answered it pretty accurately, but it spawned another question. The book basically says, Gag Hellfront was paying Prosthetnik Vogon Jeltz an awful lot of money to do some very dirty work. As one of the galaxy's most prominent and successful psychiatrists, he and a consortium of his colleagues were quite prepared to spend an awful lot of money when it seemed that the entire future of psychiatry might be at stake. So what this is telling me is that the psychiatrists from this dimension felt exactly the same as the philosophers of the other dimension. But how did the psychiatrists know what the Earth's real purpose was?
It's a great question. And of course, I can only speculate about the answer. And it also depends on what type of person you are. If you're the kind of person that believes the conspiracy theories, then you have to go one way. But if you're not, and me personally, I kind of subscribe to the idea that secrets are nearly impossible to keep. The key here, of course, is that the power of gossip is, for most people, overwhelmingly strong.
Yes.
So my theory is that the mice on Earth must have told someone.
Oh, they couldn't help themselves.
After all, they were there for 10 million years.
That's true.
You know? And that's a lot of time to keep control over the water cooler chatter.
At the end of our last episode, I talked about doing this episode again and did say email any questions if you had them. And it's been way too soon to get any questions, and I've not received any emailed questions. But I did see a question on a fan group online, and I'm going to put that one out here. And it was about Hot Black's stunt ship. And the question was, since there is no air in space, why do you need a frictionless spaceship?
It's a good question, but of course, I don't know too much about the heliosphere around the sun that it was crashing into, but I'm assuming that there's some friction associated with the particles being ejected from the sun.
Yeah, I'm sure there were a lot of different answers. There were just over 100 comments last time I looked, and there are serious answers, and there are antagonistic answers. Of course, there was the random 42. And the answer that came to my mind, and I scanned and scanned and scanned to see if any of the 100 comments had mentioned it, was for me pretty simple, and that was so it won't get scratched in a car park.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I kind of like that answer.
But the serious answers that people had were for entering atmospheres and like landing. If you're going to land the ship, you're going to go into an atmosphere, there will be friction, or space isn't a total vacuum and solar winds and all that other stuff. So
correct.
There were a lot of serious answers and scientific answers that make sense, but the car was in a car park and he didn't want it to be scratched. So now we're going to get into the specific questions about the restaurant at the end of the universe.
Questionable answer 1.
Why would a ship as advanced as the Heart of Gold have a computer that would jam up with the introduction of any question, no matter how difficult, but especially the question of how to make tea? The great-grandfather knows what tea is, so it's probably not an Earth exclusive.
Yes, that is correct. I think you're correct in saying that it would be highly unlikely that a tea-like substance would not exist somewhere else in the universe or even in the galaxy.
Correct.
I mean, that's almost impossible to fathom. However, there is something here in the reading that may add to the computer's confusion.
Okay.
And what I'm thinking about is, we know that Ford went to Earth to report for the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yes.
And he was there for 7 years, right?
About, yeah.
Yeah. And so while the whole time that he was on that planet, he was trying to get a hitchhike off of it. He was trying to get back off the planet. And of course, he never was able to, because his sub-ether never pinged, or his thumb never allowed him to catch another ride.
Right.
So that suggests that there are very few people in the galaxy going to Earth. In fact, he said he went there on a ship that was piloted by a teaser.
Correct.
That's a very infrequent event. Okay. And as we know, in the book, they describe the Earth as orbiting an unregarded yellow sun in an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descendant forms are so amazingly primitive that they still think digital watches are a pretty neat idea.
Right.
Then, of course, we can't discount the significance of the detail at which Arthur discusses tea with the computer.
Right.
And for me, this is the key factor. He goes into excruciating detail with the computer about what tea is, to the point where he's discussing the East India Company and all the different aspects of it. And at the end of that conversation, the computer says, you want dry leaves and hot water with milk
juice squirted out of a cow.
Yeah. It's an excruciating amount of detail that Arthur discusses with the computer. And with that amount of detail, I'm going to allow the computer time to come up with an answer. In other words, I just don't think that if the computer is calculating all of that detailed information, that it would find an answer quickly.
Right.
And the other piece here is that's the critical piece of this puzzle. It's that the computer is still thinking about it. It doesn't mean that they wouldn't come up with the answer. The other piece of the puzzle that I think is unique is the exquisite detail that they describe in the final results of the tea that's delivered by the computer. Suggests that they fully understood and fully comprehended the question in order to provide the ultimate result. So in my mind, it wasn't a matter of couldn't, it was just a matter of timing.
Okay. So I took it that the great-grandfather gave the computer the answer.
Again, here's where you and I are guilty, because we want to conflate all the different bits of information we have. I mean, I really prefer the approach that was given in the radio series, where it says that the computer is trying to calculate or understand the reason why he wants tea.
Yeah, that was better.
That was a much better question, because it's a much more difficult answer to come by. And I don't think the radio series doesn't mention the tea at the end, does it?
No, it was because he was an ignorant monkey who doesn't know better.
Right. The radio series gives us a better question, if you will, and a better answer, if you will. This is what he wrote in the book, so this is what we deal with.
Yeah, but mostly I was trying to figure out not why the computer didn't know what tea was, but why trying to figure out what tea was to the exclusion of all other programs, including navigation and defense.
Right.
Like my little rudimentary computer here can do a whole lot of things in the background while I'm still using the computer. But trying to figure out why or how to make tea shut down the system. That's what I was trying to get at. Not why did it not know how to make tea? That kind of obvious, I guess. But why it crippled the ship. the ship was shut down. Nothing else could happen because it had to figure out how to make tea. That seems a bit extreme. So that's the answer I'm looking for. Not because he explained the East India Tea Company and there was just an overload.
The answer is that the computer required all of its resource and power to analyze and understand every detail of the Earth so that they could analyze and understand every detail of what Arthur was talking about so that he could then provide and produce a cup of tea as defined by Arthur.
Okay, perfect.
Questionable answer 2.
Quoting the book, it says, quite how Zaphod Beeblebrox arrived at the idea of holding a seance at this point is something he was never quite clear on. So Zaphod doesn't even know. And so I asked the same question about the author's decision of putting it in there. Because he used a seance in both the radio series and the book, it makes me think that it's important and it has to happen. So why did there have to be a seance?
As you just said, that is absolutely correct. The seance is essential to the story. And I know that it seems a little odd, but after I started thinking about it, if you apply a little logic to the plot, you can find out why it's essential.
Okay.
In the book, prior to this point, we learn that Zaphod performed surgery on his brain in order to pursue his agenda.
Correct.
He did that because he couldn't have all these tricksy ideas in his head to be able to get elected galactic president because of the screening process that he would have to go through after he got elected.
Right.
So if you think about it on that level, he needed to have the surgery, but after the surgery, he needed a way to forward his agenda.
Right.
Okay? He would have to have triggering events that would allow him to move forward.
Oh, all right. Like a post-hypnotic suggestion.
Exactly. So what we're looking at here then is how would he have done that? Well, one way he would have done that was with his co-conspirators. Okay?
Right.
And the co-conspirators, in my mind, are key to this answer. And who are they? Who are the co-conspirators? They're his great-grandfather.
Right.
Zarni Whoop.
Right.
The prior president of the galaxy, Uden Vranks.
Right.
Trillian.
Okay.
And Roosta.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Trillian and Rooster are a little bit different in this, the way I've laid this out. They're both kind of important in their own fashion, right? So
Okay.
the first thing he needed to do was get elected galactic president.
Right.
And for that, I'm assuming Uden Vranks would have been able to help him direct this part of the plan. Okay?
All right.
So Uden Vranks was the first one who was involved with helping him get elected president. Okay? And then he would have to steal the ship.
Right.
Now here's where Trillian plays a part. Because we are told in the part where they talk about Trillian that she was the only other person who knew what he was planning to do.
Right.
So I'm going to assume by that statement that Trillian was informed about the need to steal the ship before he became president, before he had his surgery. So when he got out of it and became president, Trillian could say, oh, by the way, you meant to steal the ship.
Right.
Therefore, she must have been aware of at least that part of the plan.
Okay.
Then, of course, they steal the ship, and the trip to Magrathea was orchestrated by the mice. So that didn't have anything to do with Zaphod's plan. That just was an event that happened because of the mice controlling Trillian and them being on the ship and needing to get to Magrathea.
Right.
But what we don't know, and this is kind of an interesting, because it sort of harkens back to the other part of the question when you were saying, why would a computer have trouble figuring out the T situation? There's also some confusion, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, I think, about how the computer works with the improbability numbers. Okay. So I don't know how he came up with the improbability number. They do talk about a long session of calculating the value so that you could come up with the improbability of getting to Magrathea. So then, and this is where the seance comes in, right? So the next thing he had to do was live through the process.
Right.
Okay. He had to actually survive once he stole the ship.
Yes.
And in order to survive, the only person who could help him at that level, when he was under great deal of stress, in fact, We are told in the book that the thought of death was heavy in the air.
Yes.
And the fear of death does tend to focus the mind.
It does.
Therefore, that was his clue, if you will, to contact his other co-conspirator. The only person who could have helped him in that situation was his great-grandfather.
All right.
So it was one of those triggers that were implanted in a way that didn't involve his brain, so that the adrenaline juices of death would have caused him to think of his grandfather, which would have caused him to contact him, which would have allowed that process to go forward.
Oh, all right.
Okay. The last little bit of this is a little weird, because of course Zarniwoop is who tells him what to do with the ship and how to get to the end goal, which is the ruler of the universe. So that's Zarniwoop's role in moving the plot forward. Zaphod's location near the Hitchhiker's guide offices would have also been another trigger that gave him the message, find Zarniwoop.
Right.
And your point is excellent, because it does say he never was able to. But the fact is, we're told in the book that Zaphod finally recognizes these signals that he gets when he gets the message, find Zarniwoop, as having been triggered by his previous plot.
Okay.
So at that moment, he realizes, oh, wait a minute, that's why I'm doing things, because I'm getting these subconscious messages, and here's one of them, find Zarniwoop.
Okay, very good.
It's a long way around, but I think that's why the seance for me becomes essential, because he is a co-conspirator.
Yes.
And I anticipate that the argument is, well, then why doesn't he seem to act as if he knows what's going on? And I just say, well, you know what family's like.
That's right. That is right. Right.
Questionable answer 3.
So here's kind of a long question that kind of taken from different parts of the book. And when you're reading the book and you're reading each of these parts, it all makes perfect sense. But when you think of all of these parts together, all of a sudden it poses a question. So they talk about the corporate headquarters of Hitchhiker's Guide on Ursa Minor Beta. And it's a beautiful place. And there's lots of swimming pools, and it's expensive, and it's hard to get to. It's kind of a resort planet. The complaint department is on a totally different planet, near the spaceport on Edrax. The pink-winged insect behind the reception desk at the headquarters was complaining about all of the hitchhikers that come straight from the dirty spaceports, and all they ever do is complain. Well, first of all, there are no dirty spaceports on the planet with the Hitchhiker's Guide headquarters. Those are on Edrax. So even if there was a spaceport, it was hard to get to, and it was very expensive when you got there. So why would all of the hitchhikers go to the very expensive, inaccessible headquarters to complain, rather than the complaints department, which is on Edrax, right next to a spaceport?
It's an excellent question. I really like this question. And I have what I consider a pretty simple answer.
Okay.
Sometimes you just have to go to the top in order to get something done.
Let's just go straight to the top. Right. Forget the lackeys. Straight to the top.
That's right. That's right. And obviously the way the hitchhikers get there is they hitchhike.
Yes.
So they're hitchhiking on whatever vehicles are actually able to get to that planet.
Those mega freighters.
Yeah, mega freighters. Exactly. And the other thing I think is interesting here with an answer, and this always has puzzled me. I don't think of it as inconsistency, but it's a puzzling comment that they make, because we're told in the book that the complaint department is the only department in the company to consistently earn a profit.
Right. Which does pose another question.
Right. It makes me think, is it possible they figured out a way to charge people if they want to complain?
That could be, yes. Yes. How are they making money in the complaints department?
Exactly.
Questionable answer 4.
The office building of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was described as 2 30-story towers connected by a bridge halfway up their length, which, in my visualization, creates a giant H, which I have always taken for hitchhikers. But that's in the Earth language of English. And since the building is not on Earth, what is the improbability level of the first letter in Ursa Minor Beten to also look like an H?
Ah, that's a good one. Obviously, it's very improbable.
Yes.
And the idea, like you say, you've already stated it, but the idea is never even suggested in the book. I mean, it's just a coincidence of architecture. There are many buildings in China and Japan that are shaped like an H, but they don't use the Arabic letters either in their alphabet. So
Right.
my short answer is Adams thought it would be funny.
Okay. Yes. That could be said for every single one of these questions.
Yes, it could be.
Questionable answer 5.
So my next question about the Hitchhiker's Guide office building is that Zaphod was captured by taking half of the building, specifically the left-hand tower. What the book says is that it streaked through interstellar space at a speed never equaled either before or since by any other office block in the universe. This is a great joke, and it implies that this is the only building that has ever flown, and I laughed when I read it. However, shortly after that, it says that about 100 yards or so away from the vortex was what would probably have to be described as a landing pad of sorts that had scattered over it a largish area with ungainly hulks of 2 or 3 dozen crash-landed buildings. So this is not the only building that they have ever transported to the Frog Star. So why was the one Zaphod was in going the fastest ever?
That's a great question. The answer that I give is basically already stated the answer. The only one that I can come up with here is that it does specifically say office building, never equaled before or since by any office block in the universe. The landing pad is described as having a place where there are ungainly hulks of 2 or 3 dozen crash-landed buildings.
And none of them were office buildings.
None of them were office buildings. They were just buildings.
Just buildings. Regular, generic buildings. No offices. No offices
you gotta go with
in
what
these
the author
buildings.
says.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
It's silly, but that's what it says, you know?
That's what this is supposed to be.
Questionable answer 6.
So we're going to get away from the hitchhiker's offices, and we're now going to get to a different passage in the book, which is talking about the Oglaroons. And the Oglaroons are apparently an entire intelligent population which lives permanently in one fairly small and crowded nut tree. But then it says the only Oglaroonians who ever leave the tree are those who are hurled out of it for the heinous crime of wondering whether any of the other trees might be capable of supporting life at all, or indeed whether the other trees were anything other than illusions brought on by eating too many Ogla nuts. So my question is, what happens to those Oglaroonians who are hurled out? Because they can't live in another tree if they are real, because the entire population lives in a single tree. So I guess, what is the horrible fate of those Oglaroonians?
Oh boy, you're going to kick me.
Okay.
Well, that's okay. I've been kicked before. All right, so here the key is a single word.
All right.
In fact, this is one of those areas where if, like you and I, were only listening, we might not even catch the detail here.
All right.
Okay. But the missing key here is the word intelligent. It's in parentheses by the author.
Yes.
Since it is a quote, therefore, anyone hurled out of the tree is no longer intelligent. I like to believe that there's some kind of brain enhancement field surrounding this single tree on Oglaroon, and therefore that's how Oglaroonians can think if they're in that tree, and when they think, they are intelligent. Otherwise, they are not.
After hearing what you said and having the word intelligent being in quotes, that is going to mean that it is the opposite of intelligent. So we'll call them useless bloody loonies. So the entire Oglarunian population that is, quote, intelligent, meaning useless bloody loonies, lives in one single tree. All the others who question life, who are truly intelligent, get hurled out to live productive lives on the rest of the planet. And all of the useless bloody loonies remain in that one tree. I like that idea that I would have never come up with if you didn't start pointing out the fact that there are quotation marks.
Mm-hmm. Power of the quote.
The power of the quote.
Questionable answer 7.
One of the things that bugged me about the book is his tendency to only tell half the joke from the radio series. I did not understand this in the radio series, and having only half of it in the book, I understand it less now. The disembodied voice of Gargavar, taking Zaphod to the total perspective vortex, was worried about his body that would gallivant all around. He said he hoped it's gone for a rest cure because the way it's been living recently, it must be on its last elbows. Zaphod said, "Elbows? Don't you mean legs?" In the radio series, he says, "I know what I mean." But in the book, he says nothing. So what could Gargavar possibly mean?
I love this question. It just makes you laugh thinking about it. But I have a few answers here, okay?
All right.
So here we go. You ready?
And from your few, I will, I'm sure, come up with my own.
The one that you like best or your
Yes.
own? Okay.
Yes.
No problem. Okay. So one is that his body has been so worn down that he has nothing left below his stomach, and as such, he's moving along on his elbows.
Okay. Then who wants that body? Don't be jealous of it.
There you go. Well, apparently a rest cure could solve that problem.
True.
Whatever a rest cure is, okay? Or that his body is so tired that he can only crawl around on his elbows and knees.
Like a soldier
And
crawl.
in that position, his knees would outlast his elbows. So his elbows would be the weaker part of that.
Right.
The last answer that I have exposes our prejudice, okay?
All right.
So my final answer is that we are being bipedally centric. And that's showing that our prejudice is based on assuming that they have legs, that our Gargavar has legs, and that he doesn't actually walk on his elbows, or what we would consider elbows because of a translation.
Oh, all right. So it's just a difference in physiology.
Yes, 100%.
Okay. All right. I like all three of those answers. I don't have a favorite. It's all of them wrapped
There
in
you
one.
go.
Yeah.
But you're right. I kind of wish he had left the other part of the joke in, and I certainly would love to understand what he was thinking, because clearly
It's 5 words. It's 5 stinking words. I don't know why he couldn't put 5 stinking words in the book.
Questionable answer 8.
At the beginning, Zaphod tried unsuccessfully to get the computer to take them to the restaurant at the end of the universe. He was doing all kinds of calculations and he just couldn't figure it out, and he was having all this trouble and he gave up. But after meeting with Zarniwoop, he just told the computer, "Take us to the nearest restaurant." And then, in an unexplained explosion, it took them to the restaurant at the end of the universe. So what changed to make the computer be able to take them to the restaurant then that couldn't when he was trying to?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the way you phrased it, there's very little answer. I'm tending to think that the result of them ending up at the restaurant wasn't necessarily the ship, because as you know, they're not on the ship when they arrive. But let me get back to my other answer, okay? So here's what I wrote down, all right?
Okay.
Here's my response to that question, okay? At the end of the last book, Zaphod tells the group that he's going to take them to the restaurant at the end of the universe.
Right.
He doesn't ask the computer. He's not talking to the computer at that point. In fact, he has no interaction with the computer at the end of that book.
No.
Okay. Then in this book, we're told 2 hours ago, he said that he would go for a quick bite at the restaurant at the end of the universe, whereupon he had a blazing row with the ship's computer, stormed off to his cabin, shouting that he would work out the improbability factor with a pencil.
Right.
Then we're told that the ship is the most powerful and unpredictable ship in existence.
Right.
There's nothing it couldn't do, provided you knew exactly how improbable it was.
Yes, that's why he had to figure it out with a pencil.
Right, and this is what I was referring to back in the previous question. We don't know the actual way that the pilot or the director of the Heart of Gold has to input the data, which is the improbability factor, into the system to allow it to go to where they want it to go.
Right.
We're not on the ship when they leave from Agrathea, so we don't hear or understand, or Zaphod doesn't explain to us how he gives the information to the computer. And then later, we know that Zaphod and Trillian are trying to calculate a value so that they could move the ship somewhere else. So they're actually using pencils and papers and whatever to come up with the value.
Right.
So it almost appears as if the input of the improbability factor is something that is required by the ship, not calculated by the ship.
Right. Yes. Okay. I understand.
Yeah. So I don't know, but that's where I keep coming back around. And I guess he can ask the computer to help him calculate the value, but that's when he gets upset with the computer and just says, forget it, I'll do it myself.
Right. So I guess there were two ways to get to the restaurant at the end of the universe. Figuring out the improbability calculation to feed into the computer, or just say, take us to the nearest restaurant, which just improbably, coincidentally, happened to be the restaurant at the end of the universe.
Yes, you're right, because you even brought it up in our discussion of the book. Why is there 4 puffs of smoke? Why is it an explosion?
Right.
And the ship itself didn't move.
No, the ship didn't go.
Right, so the ship didn't go. So what caused that to happen? The only thing I can think of as a possible answer is they're still wrapped up in the improbability field, and that seemed to be the right thing.
Yes. Or Douglas Adams thought it would be funny. That could be the answer every time.
Questionable answers 9 through 14.
Okay, my next question is a multi-part question.
Oh, right.
So I believe it is a 5-part question that I'm going to just read all the parts, and then you can answer them in any way, shape, form, or order. This is about the great prophet Zarquan, who made his second coming in the very last moments of the universe, and his coming seemed to be follower-specific, not location-specific, because he arrived at the restaurant where his followers were dining. So that made me wonder, was that party at the restaurant all of his followers? And if it was all of his followers, why were there so few? And if that wasn't all of the followers, where were the others? Was there a bigger congregation of them somewhere else waiting for him that he ignored? Or did he make his second coming to them first? Is that what he was saying was all of the busyness that he was going through? Or is there a segment of his believers who believe he never returned? And where did he come from? And why did he disappear when the universe ended rather than being protected by the time bubble? So that's a whole lot of questions. Now, first, I think that the whole Prophet Zarquan returning just before the universe ends was hysterical. But it makes me ask so many questions after the fact.
Yep, you're right. All right, so I'm going to try to answer these in the order that you asked them.
Okay.
So the first question was about, was it the party of all his followers?
Yeah, was that all of them?
Right. The answer is no.
Okay.
Max describes them as a party of believers, very devout believers.
Okay.
This implies that there are other believers that are less devout.
Yes. So this is the core.
Right. So these are the core people. And if so, why were there so few? Because this is a subset of a subset. That's why there are so few.
Right.
The other believers obviously exist in their own time, okay?
Right.
On their own planet or planets.
Right.
Right. No, this appearance here is his second coming. So that's the answer to that.
Right.
In my mind, that's the answer to that question. And these devout believers will return to their own time and confirm that he did in fact return.
Oh, yes. Yes, they would.
So the last question is C, the last answer.
And then...
That's what I wrote.
Okay.
What the hell did I mean?
I don't know. But I like where you're going with that, because then those devout believers who go back and confirm will create more devout believers who will then go to the restaurant and be the devout believers when he returns. And then they get to go back. So it's a rotating segment of devout believers for every sitting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
there you go.
That's good.
So then your next question is, where does he come from? And
yes.
Unfortunately, since I'm not a member of the Church of the Second Coming of the great prophet Zarquan, and I don't own a copy of their Bible, I don't know from whence he came.
Right.
However, if you're asking me how did he get to the restaurant, well, I don't know that either.
Okay. I didn't ask that, but I just wanted to know where he was, which seems to be outside the universe. But I guess locally, his devout believers could be localized on one planet. And there's an entire universe to be at. And so he's just out doing other great prophet things and just came back at the very end for his second coming.
Right. And since he is able to appear as he does, he has to have some kind of godlike qualities.
It could be another dimension.
Right. I suggest that perhaps he's a member of the Q continuum.
Oh, okay. Star Trek stole another thing. There is a Q in Zarquan, and that's where it comes from.
Yeah, there you go. And then the final question is, you asked about why he disappeared at the end rather than being protected by the time bubble.
Yes.
Well, here it doesn't actually say that he did. It doesn't say that in the book. And I suspect the issue for him is time management problems. Because he said, as he gets there, he says, look, I'm sorry I'm a bit late. I've had most ghastly time, all sorts of things cropping up at the last moment. And then he turns to Max and says, how are we for time? Have I got just a... And the universe ended.
Correct.
That's the end of the sentence. So we don't know what happened after
What's
that.
the next sentence?
The next sentence is another chapter. It doesn't have anything to do with him.
Okay, it said in chapter 20, or 21, or whatever, for you, the Force Shield Dome had once again been rendered opaque, the party was over, the diners were leaving, Zarquan had vanished, along with the rest of the universe.
I missed that in the original reading, so I guess, as you say, it says that Zarquan vanished as the rest of the patrons were leaving the restaurant. I don't know. Just maybe coincidental. It doesn't say that it caused him to vanish. Maybe he chose to leave at that time.
Yeah.
Everybody else was leaving, so he figured he better leave. It's a good question. I don't really have a great answer.
Okay. I'll just say he went back to where he was before.
Yeah, sure. That works.
All right.
Questionable answer 15.
So enough about Zarquan. And now we're going to move on to Hot Black and his stunt ship. So Hot Black is doing a concert, and in this concert he's got a stunt ship that is going to crash into the sun. But before the concert, he's going to run out for a quick bite at the restaurant at the end of the universe. Why did he bring his stunt ship with him rather than just leaving it at the site of the concert? No crew seemed to go into it to leave, so it's unlikely that any crew was brought to the restaurant.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I don't have a super answer here. The only thing I can think of is the ship does not appear to have any guidance ability on its own. and as such, it might require another ship to control it.
Okay.
Not an excellent answer, because obviously they could have gotten it under control by the stage crew or something, or I don't know, maybe they left for the restaurant before the stage crew got there.
Yep, and Douglas Adams thought it would be funny.
And the only other thing I thought about, the vagaries of time travel must have required it.
That's right. That works too.
Well, yeah, now that I think about that a little bit, about the vagaries of time travel and why it might have been required,
Okay.
the four of them would not be on the ship unless the ship was, in fact, at the restaurant. So maybe time did require that the ship was there.
How do you mean?
Well, you know, I think they talk about the fact that time is immutable, that no matter what you do to time, time is going to continue, and it's the things and
Yes.
the events that happen in time are going to happen.
Correct.
So being that the time is immutable, the ship had to be at the restaurant in order for Ford and Arthur and Trillian and Zaphod to get on the ship. And that was something that time required to happen.
Oh, okay.
Questionable answer 16.
We're gonna move from Hot Black Ship to the Golga Frincham B arc. The Golga Frincham captain stated, "Our trajectory thingy was preset before we left Golga Frincham. I think partly because I'm not very good with figures." So, he is obviously not a qualified pilot. So what do you think the Golga Frincham captain's real useless job is?
2 words.
Okay.
Figurehead.
Figurehead. Okay, that's perfect. We'll just stop there.
Questionable answer 17.
We're going to jump to the man who rules the universe. And there are a lot of questions about him, but there is one rhetorical question that made me wonder, which is, do 6 black ones look like one big white one?
I'm not going to touch that.
Okay. So on that note...
Even if you presented it to me, I'm not going to touch it.
Questionable answer 18.
Since the Heart of Gold, the only ship with an infinite improbability drive, was needed to get to the man who rules the universe because he's protected by an improbability field, how do the other ships get there to ask him questions?
This is an interesting question, and I think I have an interesting answer.
Oh, very good.
And again, this is funny because this is where the listening and the reading plays in again.
Okay.
I don't know if you noticed this or not, but I don't think you did.
Maybe not.
But although the context may be the same here, the ruler of the planet is protected by an unprobability field. It doesn't say improbability field. It says un with UN.
Oh, really? Okay. I did not see that.
Yep. And in chapter 29, and this is the important part, it says it's protected by a vast field of unprobability to which only 6 men in this galaxy have a key.
Oh, all right.
We don't know anything about the nature of the key. However, it clearly exists, and it has the capacity to override the unprobability field, and that's how they get there.
I guess because I listened, I've read the book, obviously, but for this I've been listening.
Obviously.
And I did not catch that there was an unprobability versus improbability field.
It's funny because Adams wrote it, and we were listening to Adams's version, so it's clearly not clear when he reads it, the difference between unprobability and improbability.
Yeah, he is not stressing that.
Right, exactly. But it is important in the fact that if it's unprobable, that means it's possible.
Correct.
Where if it's improbable, it's not. So that's why the fields around the planet has to be something that allows the improbability drive to get through. It's a fine distinction.
Yes.
Questionable answer 19.
All right, so the last question that I have for you is that he specifically mentions that Arthur is unable to read Slarty Bartfast's signature, and he mentions because he does not read Magrathian. But since he seems to have been able to read everything else, why now can he not read Magrathian?
Excellent question. And to that I say, a rose by any other name is still a rose.
Okay.
But
elaborate.
Yes, I will. I shall. And by which I mean that an object or a verb can be translated by their function in the sentence or contextually by their related meaning.
Okay.
A name is not translatable, and it never has been.
True.
Unless there is a function or another word embedded in the name that can be sorted out. Like, I can't think of an example right now.
Rose.
What's that?
Rose.
Rose. There you go. There you go. That's an excellent example. That's why he can't read the name. And even if his brain was able to parse the Magrathian letters into Arabic, they would look like gibberish to him.
Oh, okay. So since Slarty Bartfast's name doesn't correlate with any other word that means anything, like in English we would have Rose or Bob or Bill or John, which all have other words, there's nothing that his brain can grasp onto to translate it. So that makes perfect sense.
Good. Excellent.
Well, thank you, Bryan, for answering all of the questions that I had about this book. I hope you had fun figuring them out.
I did indeed. It was a fantastic journey.
Wonderful.
But now I think it's time to say goodbye, Jeff.
I think it is.
So say goodbye, Jeff.
Goodbye, everybody. I'm going to vanish with the rest of the universe. Hi, this is Jeff. I hope you had fun listening to us discuss some of the parts of the book we found confusing and merited further explanation. There may be some of you out there who have your own questions about things in the book that you would like answered that we did not cover. If you do, email the questions to digitalwatchespodcast@gmail.com. If your questions are about a book we have already covered, we will try to work the answers into the beginning of a future episode. If the questions are about a book we have yet to cover, we will try to work those answers into that book's episode. Thank you for listening to Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea. Look for us the first Thursday of every month for a full episode. We will also release a bonus episode later in the month. A very special thanks goes out to Luke, Max, Greg, and Tim Lesnick for arranging and performing our opening theme. We would also like to thank our talented friends and family for their voice work on our introductions and commercials. A very special thank you goes out this episode to Kelly Lesnick for counting up our questions. Visit our website at digitalwatchesareapretyneatidea.buzzsprout.com, where you can find links to all my Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy inspired t-shirt designs. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube as Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea, on Instagram as Watches Idea Podcast, and on Twitter at Watches Idea. If you'd like to contact us, our email is digitalwatchespodcast@gmail.com.
This has been a Fruits for Thought production.